Today, we're diving into one of the most gruesome and, believe it or not, legally complicated murder cases in American history. This is the story of the Machete Murderer of Sutter County. So picture this. It's the spring of 1971. You're in Northern California, surrounded by these peaceful, beautiful peach orchards. But hiding just under the surface, a truly terrible secret was literally festering in the soil. And that secret, it wasn't just a single crime. It was a body count, a staggering 25 victims. Now, to put that in perspective, at the time, this made it the most prolific serial murder case in the entire history of the United States. So, you have to be asking, how on earth did a secret this massive even come to light? Well, it all started with one person noticing something that just didn't look right. Okay, so a local farm owner is just doing his rounds, inspecting his orchard, and he spots this freshly dug hole. You know, it's about the size of a grave. Kinda weird. He comes back the very next day, and it's been filled in. That was enough to give him the creeps, and for good reason. He called the police, and that's when they unearthed the first of many, many victims. As the police kept digging and more graves were found, a really tragic picture of the victims started to emerge. These were vulnerable men, mostly drifters, transient laborers, guys who lived on the fringes. Their killer would later just dismiss them as trespassing winos. And the way they died, it was brutal. Almost every single one had been hacked or stabbed to death. The question was obvious. Who could be doing this? Who was preying on these men that society had, in many ways, already forgotten? And the answer, well, it wasn't some shadowy figure lurking in the darkness. No, the suspect was someone right at the center of the local farming community. The police arrested a man named Juan Vallejo Corona. Get this, he was a labor contractor. His job was literally to hire the exact type of men who were ending up in these shallow graves. He supplied workers to the ranches, placing him right at the epicenter of the whole horrific scene. Now, here's where the story gets another layer of complexity. Corona wasn't just some guy who snapped. He had a long, documented history of severe mental illness. In fact, way back in 1956, his own brother had him committed. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and underwent 23 rounds of electroshock therapy. You'd think a killer this brutal would be careful, right? Well, not so much. Corona was surprisingly, almost unbelievably careless, and it was a trail of simple, everyday paperwork that would end up being his downfall. I mean, this is just shocking. Buried right there, in the graves with his victims, investigators found some pretty damning stuff. Meat market receipts signed by Corona, and Bank of America deposit slips printed with his full name and address. It's just mind-boggling carelessness. And the evidence just kept piling up. Back at his house, police found a work ledger. The prosecution called it a death list, and for good reason. It had the names of 34 men, 7 of whom were confirmed victims, with dates next to their names that lined up perfectly with when they likely went missing. And if there was any sliver of doubt left, the search of his house pretty much erased it. Police found what they believed were the murder weapons: blood-stained knives, a machete, a pistol, and even bloody clothes. So, with Corona behind bars, the case went to court. But this wasn't an open and shut trial. Oh no. This kicked off a legal saga, a real roller coaster that would go on for decades. Just look at this timeline. He's first convicted in 73. Then, in 78, that conviction gets thrown out. He gets a whole new trial. In 82, he's convicted all over again on all 25 counts. And he stays in prison right up until he dies in 2019. And the 2 trials couldn't have been more different. The first one was, well, a mess. His defense team called 0 witnesses. 0. That incompetence was actually the main reason he got the appeal. Then, in the second trial, the new defense team comes out swinging, calling over 50 witnesses and floating this absolutely shocking new theory that the real killer was Corona's own half-brother. The jury didn't buy it for a second. But the story doesn't just end with a guilty verdict. Nope. This case left behind a huge legacy of controversy, and it started a massive ethical firestorm, all centered on the behavior of his first lawyer. This whole mess forced the legal world to look in the mirror and ask a really tough question, one that gets to the very heart of what justice is supposed to be. Should a defense lawyer ever be allowed to profit from their own client's story? See, the problem here is a massive conflict of interest. I mean, think about it. If a lawyer owns the book rights to his client's story, he might, even subconsciously, make choices in court that make for a better, more dramatic story, instead of choices that give his client the best possible defense. And that is exactly what happened here. It's the reason Corona's first conviction was overturned. His first lawyer had him sign over the literary rights to his life story as payment for his legal fees. The appeals court basically said, no way, that's a huge conflict of interest, and it tainted the entire first trial. Corona's life in prison was, as you can imagine, long and violent. Early on, another inmate stabbed him 32 times, and he lost his left eye. He was denied parole 8 different times. It wasn't until 2011, decades later, that he finally admitted he did it, before dying in 2019. And it's so important to remember the scale of this. Before we all knew the names Gacy or Bundy, Juan Corona held that grim, dark title, the most prolific serial murderer in the history of the United States. So, in the end, the case of the Machete Murderer is about so much more than just one man's horrific crimes. It actually became a landmark case about the integrity of our entire justice system. It forced everyone to take a hard look at where you draw the line between defending a client and cashing in on their story. And that leaves us with a really unsettling question to think about. When the story of a crime becomes more valuable than the outcome of the trial, who is it that really ends up paying the price for that kind of justice?